Hey everyone, Franz and I are back, and we have a wonderful interview here with Greg Brunk, who's the head of product at MetaRouter. Hey, welcome, Greg.
Thanks for having me.
Can you start by telling our audience a little bit about MetaRouter and your role there?
Yeah, absolutely. MetaRouter is a customer data company, and we primarily focus on server-side tag management use cases, and generally customer data infrastructure use cases. And the core founding principle of the business is that enterprises should own their own data. We really believe that really strongly, and have kind of built our entire business around that idea. So obviously, tag management and customer data are not necessarily new concepts, but I think where MetaRouter really focuses is on the sort of highly private cloud, fully owned, fully secure, really kind of first party approach to the problem. And there's a lot of different use cases for that, but I think the best grouping mechanism is customer data infrastructure. And I'm the head of product and also a co-founder of the business, so I'm responsible for R&D and what we build and what we don't build and how we go about it.
Okay, Greg, for those that are not deep in tag management or maybe even server-side tag management, can you give a quick history of tag management and the shift to server-side tag management and why did it happen, that shift?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think the original concept of a tag was probably built first by Google Analytics, and it was the idea that, hey, if you have a use case for data that's coming off of your website, there needs to be a mechanism with which to collect that data and then integrate it into the use case, the platform. And that was originally created as like an analytics function. And then as other sort of use cases around the internet with advertising and marketing and reporting and personalization and other things started coming online, everybody developed their own tags. And it's, really at the end of the day, it's third-party JavaScript that runs on your digital properties and collects information. And I think what happened from a historical standpoint, and this is pertinent to us and our story, is that the use cases and the vendors involved got so prolific that the site started to get really bogged down with the amount of third-party JavaScript that was necessary. And actually one of our sort of founding customers that really helped us get the business off the ground several years ago was a Fortune 25 retailer that had a third-party tag, shipped some malignant code on accident to their tag, and it actually took the site down, and they lost tens of millions of dollars in revenue overnight because their whole site went down. And so they kind of had a very strong interest to say, how do we still enable these use cases, whether it's analytics or advertising or marketing, but do it in a way that doesn't require third-party code, so that we can uphold standards around safety and security and reliability and speed and performance of our site. And that was kind of a top-down executive mandate that we now have seen pretty commonly across the industry, where it's like, just get rid of the third-party code, find another way to do this. So that was kind of our initial founding use case, was how do we integrate with, Facebook and Google and Salesforce and Adobe and your data warehouses and all these downstream destinations without actually requiring you to put third-party technology on the page, and still do it in a way that preserves the same kind of match and efficacy that those tags otherwise had. And so that's kind of the shift.
And you have also referred to your platform as a customer data infrastructure. Is that a broader concept covering more use cases, other use cases?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, server-side tag management is definitely a core use case for us, but really, having a central collection of customer data, like behavioral data about what your users are doing on your sites and application, really any use case that requires that data is something that we work in. So, and particularly, like I said, for those that really want to own that data collection and integration, they may have compliance reasons they want to do that. They may have performance reasons they want to do that. They may have competitive mitigation that they want to do that. There's a lot of reasons why people really want to own their data, not necessarily just kind of distribute it through third-party mechanisms. And so that's really where we play. And I would say, the use cases that we commonly encounter outside of server-side tag management for that data is, native and composable CDP is very common for us to kind of power those mechanisms. We also are heavily involved in retail media network efforts, as well as really any media network. I mean, we've got like rideshare companies that are taking media networks online. There's publisher media networks. So really anybody that's trying to commercialize their data in ways that are sort of outside of the core company KPIs to sell product, it's the same data, and we deal in that data and we help route that data very securely and effectively. And so we're in those use cases. Also, like anytime anonymous to known and cross domain is really important, is something that we play in, because we have a lot of technology that helps aggregate and centralize third-party identities into the first-party data feed so that you can more effectively use it. And so, that can be analytics and marketing. It could be attribution modeling, and then the last space where I would say customer data infrastructure is really important is in high compliance industries. And that's a big tailwind for us, where it's not just an advantage to handle data extremely securely through your own private cloud. It's absolutely critical in order to maintain HIPAA compliance or PCI compliance. So we tend to operate in those spaces really well because our entire platform can deploy inside your private cloud. And that is like a very high level checkbox that some industries have to check, that then waterfalls down through other InfoSec processes. And so, we tend to play in that space as well.
Your marketing team has come up with a catchy phrase that I've heard a few times, calling MetaRouter a CDP's best friend. Why is that?
Yeah, I would say that's really kind of a piece of technology that we built that we call the sync injector. It's kind of a silly name, but nothing has ever been as effective at describing it. And so we've never rebranded it. And it's stuck, but it's actually something that we are in the process of patenting. And it's a strong advantage for us in the market. And essentially what it does is it allows, when a new user lands on the page, we will sync with all the different downstream vendors that you want to integrate data with, or in a CDP's use case that you want to activate audiences into, or potentially run reporting against for like campaign optimization or attribution modeling. And we'll kind of centralize those identities and then enrich them into the first party data feed. So what that means is like, we'll go out and get Facebook IDs and Google IDs and Trade Desk IDs and Pinterest IDs and X IDs. And, we'll kind of build a first party cookie set, or sometimes an IndexedDB cookie set, doesn't really matter. But the point is that then that entire set of anonymous identities is enriched into the data feed, so that when we're building profiles in CDP, which is really common for us, we'll collect the data and identify the users and build profiles in the CDP. We'll provide that data. What that means is if you have 1 million users in an audience that you built in your CDP, but only 100,000 of them have like known hashed email or known PII identifiers, we're providing IDs for the other 900,000 users that are still addressable if you're going to go activate into Trade Desk or you're going to go activate into Facebook. And those numbers are completely made up. But every business has a different amount of coverage of known users and unknown users. And so what MetaRouter tries to do is help CDPs tell an anonymous to known story and be able to say, we can activate much larger segments, get significantly more activation reach downstream of our platform, because we, the CDP, now have these anonymous identifiers. And often MetaRouter's kind of white labeled in there as the tech that's doing that anonymous ID collection. And really what it does at the end of the day is move those IDs from the third party context into the first, so that you can actually access them. So like when Facebook's running, it's dealing in all kinds of identities and cookie spaces that it uses to interface with its platform, but that's all locked behind their third party domain. What MetaRouter kind of does is bring that into the enterprise's control. And often that then gets enriched into the CDP profile, so that then the CDP can make use of those IDs when going and activating into Facebook or Google or whatever it is. So we see ourselves as like a kind of a reach expander, a reach booster for CDPs, along with obviously collecting the actual behavioral data that powers those audiences. We kind of put those two things together and enrich that either into the warehouse the composable CDP is running on, or directly in the sort of standalone CDPs data APIs. And then that just makes it so that that CDP is significantly more effective.
What are some great examples of customers using MetaRouter in that way you just described?
Yeah, I mean, I think the use cases where we've taken that online, we have some we have a couple of standalone CDPs that use our tech for data collection. We also have several composable players where really the integration from MetaRouter standpoint is just the warehouse, and then the CDP runs on top of the warehouse. But I think a couple standouts that have really taken off are Action IQ and Salesforce CDP, and we work really closely with both of them and have had great relationships with them. And we're seeing customers activating entirely unknown data sets with really strong match into platforms like Google and Meta, Trade Desk, and Pinterest. And it allows those customers to realize much more quickly and without a tremendous amount of overhead, the value of their CDP, especially for those that don't have very strong PII coverage of data, or sometimes for those that don't want to use PII. I mean, there's reasons why you may not want to be dealing in PII based IDs. And so to have an alternative option to say, these users have visited my site, they've engaged with products, I'd like to retarget them, I'd like to provide a better experience, a more personalized experience, and be able to actually address those users in the products where you can do that personalization or retargeting without needing to deal in PII is a big advantage for certain customers. And without throwing around too many numbers, I mean, we've seen dramatic improvement in overall reach of audiencing efforts and activation efforts downstream of CDP. And obviously that number goes up or down depending on your coverage and comfortability using PII, but we really aim to bridge the gap.
Well, one of the things you had said there about the composable CDPs and cloud data warehouses, I'd love to just get your perspective on, the growth of cloud data warehouses and lakehouses in marketing. How do you see this changing the Martech stack?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we're pretty far into that maturity curve. I can't think of an enterprise that doesn't have one or many significant EDW investments, right? Data warehouse investments. I think, our take on it is it's a very good idea, but your EDW is only as good as the data that's in it. And that is hands down the largest sort of slowdown and challenge that we see with adoption of composable use cases, or really actualizing the value of your data warehouses. If it's structured poorly, if it doesn't have the right identifiers, if you've got to do tons of data loops trying to get compliance implemented across it, if you have access problems, if you have reverse ETL problems getting the data back out, if you have tracking problems getting the data in, you have real-time problems with optimizing your queries. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if it's strong, well-structured, well-enriched data that you can trust living in your warehouse from the get-go, you're going to be able to activate the use cases for it. And there are lots and lots of those use cases. But I think what MetaRouter aims to do is have a product that allows you to shift a lot of that complexity left, essentially. Mm-hmm. So rather than loading in unstructured data and then doing a bunch of ETL operations to clean up that data, and then doing ETL operations to strip out non-compliant data, and then doing ETL operations to enrich identity into that data, what we try to do is say, in real time, take care of those jobs so that by the time the data arrives in the warehouse, it's of extremely high quality. And it's already been structured. It's already been enriched. The sync injector can provide the anonymous IDs. We have server-side ability to enrich known IDs from secure loyalty endpoints without actually exposing that to the internet in any way. Get it right as it's in transit, so that by the time it arrives in your warehouse, you can just query it and get the value out of it, as opposed to spending a ton of time restructuring and running what would be referred to as tons of data loops to get it into the right usable format.
So you spoke about data quality, and that's becoming more and more important as it's coming to the forefront. And how do we make sure the data is good and trustworthy as a company? I mean, you just explained how you go through those loops, and how do we govern it well?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the first thing is there's often a misconception that data quality is just about structural quality, that it's highly normalized, or that your schemas are well structured, or that those schemas are optimized for query efficiency. But there's a lot more to quality. The depth of insights that you're capturing, is very much an implementation concern that business users want to see great insight and depth, but it's really engineering that's implementing the tracking and the pipelining experience. And there can be a huge delta between those things. Obviously, high quality data means data you can trust, and therefore InfoSec and compliance and privacy need to be considered. Not just for like legal reasons, but because it's highly effective to talk to users that actually want to talk to you instead of, to potentially retargeting users that don't, right? So, I would say, the first answer is like broaden your definition of quality. Quality should consider, yes, structural, but it should consider how identified and attributable are the data sets, how anonymous to known is your tracking historically, so that you can get a full picture of that user's behavior. Do you have an understanding of cross-domain? Do you have an understanding of securely being able to enrich from your loyalty ecosystem, if you have one, or your CRM, to make sure that you're getting the broadest coverage of identification? And normalization and data structure being really consistent, whether you're tracking from your mobile app or you're pulling in data from offline data sets or whatever. Having an ability to ensure quality across all of those planes means that as you're taking on new use cases for the warehouse, yes, you've got enterprise marketing consuming. Now you want retail media to consume, or you want a new CDP to run on top of it. You don't want to have to go back to the beginning and say, okay, let's get a new data pipeline in place that has compliance enforcement, that has data structural normalization, that has identity enrichment. Every single time you take on a new use case, it's better to get all that stuff right once, so that you have kind of a broad business agreed upon data set in the warehouse that's safe and secure. And so like selfishly, we would say shift all that stuff left and get a great customer data infrastructure and pipelining tool in place that'll make sure that the warehouse is ready for any and all use cases, and that it's data that you can trust.
So aside from getting all that data and leveraging it in, what we think of as, marketing operations around our core business, definitely cool. Opens up a bunch of, new creative things we can do there. But you had mentioned earlier about, companies wanting to be able to harness that data to actually monetize it as well too. What are some of the things you're seeing there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's, one obviously easy to talk about use case is retail media. I mean, I think it was like a McKinsey article I saw recently was like, it's going to be like $190 billion industry by 2028. It's a very large opportunity for anyone who has first party data to say, how do I objectively think about commercializing that? And I think what's difficult is that there's very few standards. The retail media is not new. Obviously, Amazon and Walmart, Target, and others have been doing this very well for a while, but it's juvenile in that there aren't sort of standards and practices. I always use the analog of like corporate accounting. It's like, it's so structured now. It was invented in the mid 1800s that there's the big four that come in and run a very standard playbook, and you know exactly how to do your corporate accounting, and there's very little finesse, right? Or at least there should be very little finesse. Whereas like retail media, there's a small subset of players that are making a ton of money doing it, but they're keeping their competitive advantage of how they're doing that very close to the vest, because obviously that's a big competitive advantage for them. So they're not writing articles around the right infrastructural approach, the right strategic approach, the right products you have to have in place, the right data sets that you should be tracking. So everybody kind of has to build their way through what we're seeing is like a data maturity curve in retail media, or in just like standing up a media network in general. And so I think we've been really blessed with pretty broad exposure to that. And I think at the heart and soul to your question, it's how do we think objectively about commercializing our data as much as we commercialize our actual products? So, I think what I'll just say is like, what I think is really important is that you are able to kind of scale through those different points along the maturity curve, kind of catching up to where Amazon is, let's say, in terms of just like broad ability to commercialize their data. You really want to try to and jump through those different points on the maturity curve in like a sublinear complexity effort, right? Mm-hmm. And that goes back to that idea of like, don't re-architect from the beginning. If you're doing on-site advertising on your site, and you want to go to offsite advertising, you don't want to stand up entirely new data feeds, entirely new infrastructure, entirely new warehouses. Like, make sure that from the beginning, your warehouse has the anonymous IDs that will allow brands to not just advertise on your site, but also advertise on Trade Desk, right? And how do you do that? Get the data right at the beginning, and then you can take on offsite use cases. You can take on non-endemic use cases. You can take on, direct integration with your individual brands so that you can collaborate with them better to optimize those campaigns. Like, get the data infrastructure right first, and you can scale much more quickly up that curve and ultimately be a big part of that $190 billion industry, hopefully in a sublinear, complex way.
Man, time is flying, and the list of questions we have is so long. But I'm afraid we have to get to some, I don't know.
I think we
closing
covered most of it.
Sorry?
I think we covered most of it.
Yeah. Well, and any closing advice you'd like to give to marketing ops teams preparing for the next year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, probably three things. We would encourage everyone to own their data feeds. If you're still find yourself in a place where you're delegating most of the management and processing and collection of your data to a third party, and data is leaving your ecosystem to go to somebody else to then manage it, analyze it, structure it, deliver it into use cases, that's not going to scale well with, what the private industry is doing with browsers, what the public is doing with regulation. You do not want to be scrambling to adapt to those changes by taking offline a third-party vendor and then building something in-house. I mean, I think the more you can own your own data collection, routing, transformation, delivery, hydration, all those different steps that allow you to take on advertising and marketing and analytics efforts, think about investing in owning it, whatever that looks like, whether you build or whether you buy your way through that process or whatever it is. I think a key criteria that's important to use when considering new vendors is, do they allow me to run this in my own cloud? Can I run this in my own cloud? What's the technical overhead for running this in my own cloud? And that will future-proof you well as the industry continues to change. And then I think the other kind of big one is, as Google kind of pump fakes on killing cookies and then doesn't do it, as PII is becoming increasingly difficult to use, I think you want to, as a business, make sure that you own and understand your unknown to known strategy as a business. First party data is really important, but it's not always easy to turn all data into known first party data. And therefore, you need to have a strategy for unknown data. And I think that looks like making sure you get your hands and fully own the identities that are used in programmatic and unknown spaces, like how Facebook is advertising to your users and driving traffic to your site, how Trade Desk is doing the same thing, how Google's doing the same thing. You as a business should be pushing to own that stuff so that you can actually measure effectiveness. It's really difficult for your entire measurement strategy around customer data to be based only on known, because that might be a very small percentage. And so being able to identify those users yourself and understand those users and how you're interacting with them in the paid media landscape or in the advertising landscape or marketing landscape is really important. And the only way to do that is to have a demonstrative answer to how you're identifying unknown users. And that's a big, broad statement, but if it's not a thesis that you have in your marketing and advertising teams, it probably should be. And then you can start working through, what do we need to do to better understand unknown users, identify unknown users, and securely and maturely handle interfacing with them just like we do with our known users. And I think that's an important thing as the world continues to change how we're able to track data.
That is excellent advice. Greg, thank you so much for taking this time to tell us about all the power and potential of customer data infrastructure. And thank you again for your support for Martech for 2025.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thanks for the great questions. And it's been a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you.